you've been around my channel for any length of time, you know that size inclusivity is incredibly important to me. As somebody who lives in a larger body, I need to have a pattern that fits my measurements. But not all designers make patterns that fit my body size or those larger than mine. But I'm going to show you some size inclusive options for some of these really popular patterns that are not size inclusive. Here is my top 20 size inclusive dupes. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Knitted by Whitney YouTube channel. Yes, I have another pattern roundup for you, and this one is a little extra special because it was suggested by one of you. I received a comment on my community post that I did recently asking you what you would like to see in the next little while, and of course pattern roundups are always a popular choice, but somebody made the suggestion that I should look at patterns that are size inclusive options for popular non-size inclusive patterns. So that is what today is. I'm going to be sharing with you my top 20 size inclusive pattern dupes. Now I want to preface this by saying I am not attacking the designers who have designed patterns that are not size inclusive. Do I agree with their choice to offer limited sizing in their patterns? Of course not. But not every designer is going to design inclusively. I would love it if they did. And as you'll see as I get into the patterns on this list, some of these designers have actually changed as they've grown as designers and now offer inclusive sizing. But some of the people on this list are repeat offenders, and at least in one or two cases, they are completely closed off to the option of being size inclusive. Now, what I mean when I say that a pattern is size inclusive, I mean that it goes up to at least a 60-inch bust once you account for the ease of the pattern. So I also believe that ease is a personal choice, and if a pattern offers a range of ease, let's say for example they say 2 to 4 inches of positive ease, and a pattern goes to 64 inches, that means that you can knit it all the way up to a 60-inch bust and still get those 4 inches of positive ease. I also believe that you should be able to knit it with 2 inches of positive ease or even no inches of positive ease, because I firmly believe that ease is a personal choice. I don't think I've ever mentioned it in one of my pattern roundup videos, but whenever I put the images on the screen of the patterns that I mention, the measurements that I put underneath those images are the finished measurement of the garment. I just find it's easier to stick with those finished measurements. And like I said, ease is a personal choice. So let's get into these pattern dupes. The way I'm going to structure my list, and the reason that I have centered myself in my viewfinder here, is that I am going to put the non-size inclusive pattern on one side and the size inclusive option on the other side. And if I got the wrong hand for each of those, we'll find out, because I have mirrored my screen, but sometimes you're a little unsure of what side is what. I'll know when I do editing if I got my hands right or wrong. But let's get into my list of pattern dupes. Now, when I was putting together my list, I did also crowdsource some ideas from friends of mine to see what patterns they wish had a size inclusive option. And I've included a lot of patterns that I wish were size inclusive for myself personally. So this will be a little mix of ones that I wish I had an option for and some that my friends have told me they wish they had an option for. I have plenty more of patterns that people wish were size inclusive. I don't necessarily have size inclusive options for them, so I have limited this list to 20. I would like to do another video of these in the future, but again, it depends on if I can find options for some of those sweaters. There's a particular one that is bothering me that I can't find a size inclusive option for, but hopefully there'll be something like it in the future. So let's get into these patterns. The first non-size inclusive pattern is possibly one of the most popular ones on this list. It's not the most popular, but it's one that I know a lot of people have been clamoring for a size inclusive option, and that is the field sweater by Camilla Vod. This pattern is one that a lot of people were really excited about. It definitely got a lot of attention when it was on the front page of Ravelry, I think maybe last year or the year before, and unfortunately it is not size inclusive. So an option that I would like to give instead is the Foxberry Tee by Sari Nordland. Now, of course, there are differences between these patterns. I have tried to find something that is as close as I can find, or at least gives the same vibe as the original pattern. I'm in no way encouraging designers to go out and make copycats of non-size inclusive patterns and make them inclusive. That's not what I'm advising. I just wish these original patterns were size inclusive. And if you like those patterns, here is an option that you can make that is similar. So the field sweater is such a cute sweater. It is top down, circular yoke, featuring lace, cables, and baubles. And it is shown in a short sleeve length, but I feel like it would be pretty simple to just lengthen those sleeves if you wanted a long sleeve version. The field sweater does come in both long sleeve and short sleeve. However, the Foxberry Tee, as the name suggests, is just a short sleeve sweater. The next pattern on my list is a bit of a twofold pattern because the dupe that I have found can work for both of these sweaters. So the two non-size inclusive sweaters are the Magnolia Bloom by Camilla Vod and the Chunky Dahlia by Lena Homsosu. I hope I pronounced correctly. And neither of these ones are size inclusive, and I actually bought the Magnolia Bloom without even knowing that it wasn't size inclusive. So I actually have this one in my pattern library, and I really wish I could make it, but it does not fit my size. So the pattern that I have chosen to be a dupe for this one is the Falling Leaves sweater by Iris H. Iris is a newer designer to my knowledge, but my friend Emily Knits is a big fan of hers and has knit several of her patterns. And I really love the look of the Falling Leaves sweater. I think it really evokes the same feeling of the Magnolia Bloom and both the Dahlia, because they both have a leaf motif to them, albeit a different style. The Magnolia one I think is more meant to look like a flower, but there are sort of leaf shapes to that lace and cable work. And I feel like the Falling Leaves sweater really evokes that same style. I love the look of those vines and leaves coming down from the collar of the sweater with those little baubles look like berries. I think it's just a really cute, really fun sweater, and it's a great option if you like either the Magnolia or the Dahlia. The next pattern on this list is one that I personally was so excited about and then had my soul crushed when I found out it was not size inclusive. And it's so close to being size inclusive that it was kind of annoying. But this is the Porcelain sweater, also by Lena Homsosu. This one took the internet by storm last year, and it's because it's such a great color combination. So what I've done is I've chosen a pattern that features a similar band of colorwork drop shoulder style sweater, and it doesn't look the same because it's different colors, but the version that I'm making myself does match because I have color matched it, and that is the Care sweater by Rebecca Clow. I am a big Rebecca Clow fan. I love her pattern so much. There will be at least 2 more on this list that will be dupes for patterns, and I am just so in love with her designs. She really prioritizes size inclusivity. And funny enough, she got into designing patterns because she was being an advocate for size inclusivity in patterns and talking to other designers who were not being inclusive. And she kind of felt that she needed to test it out herself to see if she could be, how hard it was to be a size inclusive designer. And she's now a full-time knitwear designer, always making size inclusive patterns that to me are incredibly creative and very different from everything else that I see. So let Rebecca Clow be an indicator that size inclusivity in pattern designing is a choice. You can either make that choice or not make that choice. And I'm so happy that someone like Rebecca has decided to make that choice, because I get to benefit from being able to knit so many of her patterns because they're gorgeous. But the carrot sweater specifically is one that I particularly love. I'm currently working on it, although mine's in hibernation right now. And the pattern sample that I've shown here is red and beige, but my version is white and blue to look like the porcelain sweater. My friend Madison of Florange Apparel has also knit this pattern, the care sweater, and she did some extra colorwork charts to make hers look more like the porcelain sweater, and she got the idea from me to do it in those colors to try and make something that looks like the porcelain sweater. So I already know that it looks really similar, and it's a great way of getting the same look while making sure that the pattern that you make will actually fit you, at least in my case. Now we come to a designer who has been in the hot seat for their size inclusivity, and it's because they have a very large following. They are a very popular designer, probably the most popular, and it boggles my mind that as they've increased their sizing, they have not gone back to a couple of their patterns that I think are incredibly popular and should be made size inclusive if they are going into their back catalog and changing patterns. This is Petite Knit, and the first pattern of hers that I want to share is the No Frills sweater, which is quite possibly one of the most popular patterns on Ravelry. Definitely one of the most popular garment patterns. It's up there with the flax and the love note, but this is one of the most popular patterns. It's definitely a really popular pattern for beginners because it is, like the name suggests, a no frills sweater. It's a very simple top-down raglan sweater. But there is a size inclusive option that you could make instead, and that is the Cozy Classic Raglan by Jessie Made Designs. Now, the reason that I say you could make this one instead is for the people who don't fit into the no frill sweater or who choose to only make size inclusive patterns. The point of this video is not to tell people not to make these size inclusive patterns. I am never one to judge people what they choose to make or not to make. I'm never going to come at you and say, don't knit that, it's not size inclusive. That's not what I'm about. That's not my style. I'm merely showing options for people that prioritize size inclusivity in their making, or in my case, require things to be size inclusive in order to fit me. So the reason that I showed the Cozy Classic Raglan for the no frill sweater is that they are basically the exact same sweater. Both of these patterns are top-down raglans that use the same size needles, the same type of yarn, the same stitch gauge, and they feature the same details. They have a single stitch raglan going down the body of the sweater. They have a 1x1 rib along the neckline, the cuffs, and the hem, and they basically have the same shaping to them as well. I don't have either of these patterns in my library, so I can't do a direct comparison and actually look at the instructions, but from an outsider's perspective, they're very, very similar. So if you're also looking for a very beginner-friendly pattern and you want it to be size inclusive, the Cozy Classic Raglan is a great option. I have one more petite knit pattern that I was able to find a dupe for, and that is the September Jacket, which is an all-over brioche cardigan with pockets. And the pattern that I offer as a dupe is Linger by Osa Bukta, which I hope I pronounced correctly. This is one that I have showed off before because this one is a free pattern and it has appeared in at least one of my videos. I don't think it's been in 2 pattern roundups yet. This is its second appearance, but I love this pattern. I think it's so beautiful and it looks very similar to the September Jacket. It's not identical. It does have a couple of key differences. The September Jacket, I believe, has a folded collar and a folded button band, but the Linger only has a single layer collar and button band. And the September Jacket is full on brioche and the Linger is half brioche or fisherman's rib or tuck stitch. They have a couple of different names, but it's slightly easier if you're new to brioche and you haven't done it yet. But this one features some of the same elements. There's both pockets, little cuffed bishop sleeves, really round neck. The other difference between these two patterns is that the September jacket is a dropped shoulder, whereas the Linger is a raglan. So it is a slightly different construction, but the finished result looks very similar. These ones also have almost the exact same gauge as well, which is why I combined these two, even though the Linger has a slightly different construction method. This next designer, I have a little bit of a hard time talking about because they have absolutely no inclination to be size inclusive. Myself and other makers have actually tried to have conversations with her about it, but she shows no desire to be size inclusive, at least the last time that I spoke to her about it. So it's really disappointing to see someone with that attitude, especially with how the knitting and crafting world is trending towards being more size inclusive overall. But like I said at the beginning, size inclusivity is a choice, and if a designer does not want to offer their sizes in an inclusive range, that is their decision. So this is my favorite things knitwear, and I have 3 other patterns that I have found dupes for. The first one is camisole number 9, which is your basic tank. I love this style. I think it's a great style. It's really useful for a lot of wardrobe styles. It's a great layering piece, that type of thing. And I have found almost an exact dupe. This one is the Palm Springs tank by Knit California. And Leslie actually modeled her pattern off of her own store-bought tank top from Old Navy. But it's really interesting how similar it looks to the camisole number 9. However, Leslie's is size inclusive. And I really love a lot of the details that Leslie has on hers. She has a folded edge along the armhole as well as on the neckline. Great fitting throughout. I've seen this on a variety of bodies and it's absolutely beautiful on everybody. And you wouldn't know it, but looking at those straps, which to me look like they might be a little narrow for myself and where my bra strap sits, I have seen friends of mine who are also large chested and their bra straps are completely covered by it. So I'm very, very intrigued by that. It's almost a bit of magic because when you knit the pattern without those edging details, it looks really small and skinny, but once you add those edge details, it transforms the tank top. I know Gabby of Gabby Owl Eyes recently made a couple of them and they just look so good. But again, it is a great size inclusive option for a non-size inclusive pattern. The second one of her patterns that I have a dupe for is sweater number 15. And this is one that I've seen a lot of people make, especially as their first cable sweater, because it is the same style of cable and it is a drop shoulder, so there's minimal shaping to it. But there's another option that you could make if you would prefer a size inclusive option, and that is the Front Porch Sweater by Kevin Haggerty. And this one is slightly different. This one isn't just cables. There are also rows of just stockinette pieces which break up those cables. Although I do feel that if you wanted to omit those and make it more like the sweater number 15, you could just purl those stitches instead of knitting them and you would get a similar look. You wouldn't have those lines. If you have followed me for a while over on Instagram and you remember my Knitflix series from a couple years ago, you might also remember that I included Kevin's pattern as a dupe for Andy's cerulean sweater in The Devil Wears Prada. And the third, my favorite things knitwear pattern that I have a dupe for is sweater number 18, which is one that I was looking for a dupe a couple of years ago and the options were limited at that time. But since then, another pattern has been published that looks more similar to it. I actually had 3 options that I was looking at as a dupe for this sweater, but I decided to go with the Retro Sweater by Tricot Meringue, which I hope I pronounced correctly. My French is not very great, but I try. And this one looks really, really similar. There are a few differences. Instead of a 1x1 ribbed collar that is folded, this one has a single layer 2x2 ribbed collar that finishes with a rolled hem, which is really cute. And it is a slightly different textured stitch. Now this pattern is a little different as well because it is knit using 3 different colored yarns that you kind of fade along the sweater. It kind of gives the impression of making it look like color changing yarn, but this one is one that you could easily just use a single color yarn and get a more similar look to the sweater number 18. But if you wanted to have a little fun with it, you could also make it a couple of different colors. The next non-size inclusive pattern that I want to share is one that the designer is an incredibly prolific designer. They have designed so many different things, and they're actually known now for being size inclusive, but this is one of their older patterns that just sadly is a little too short to meet the mark. And that is the Felix cardigan by Amy Christoffers, otherwise known as Savory Knitting. And the sweater that I have found that looks very, very similar to this one is the Rosa Bridal by Alongavec Anna. This is one that I have talked about before, and there is a V-neck option of this sweater as well, and there is a kids version too. So this one is just your basic top-down raglan round neck cardigan, but they both feature the same raglan stitch detail, and that's those couple of little eyelets along the raglan line. Those raglan little eyelets are on both the front and the back of the cardigan, and I really love Amy Christoffers' designs that are size inclusive, and I do think she's a great designer. I just think if you want the look of the Felix sweater, but you don't fit into that size range, the Rosa Bridal is very similar. There is one difference, however. The Felix cardigan uses worsted weight yarn, and the Rosa Bridal uses, I think the original is 2 strands of mohair together, but you could use a fingering and a mohair or just a single DK weight yarn. The next couple of patterns are from the same designer, and this is someone who is a little wishy-washy with their pattern sizing because sometimes they are just over the edge of inclusive and most of the time they are just under what the inclusive range is, which makes it kind of difficult to look at their patterns and feel that I could make any of them because I really never know until I take a look at it whether or not it's going to fit me. So the first one is the Camille Wrap Cardigan by Joanna Garish. I hope I pronounced correctly. And this is someone who makes beautiful designs. I'm really interested in a lot of her designs. I love the style that she goes for. It's really one that is modern. It is feminine. The 3 that I've chosen are quite feminine designs. A lot of her patterns appeal to me, and I actually have featured at least one of them in a pattern roundup before, so it's kind of disappointing that I can't rely on her as a size inclusive designer. But I have found some fun dupes for the few patterns that I have for her. The one for the Camille Wrap cardigan is the Cara Wrap Top by Rebecca Clow of the Cray of Bea. Now this is a pattern that Rebecca released last fall. I believe it came out in November, and I feel like it flew under the radar because this is a really beautiful pattern that has some really excellent sizing to it to make it fit perfectly. You would think a wrap cardigan would just be slowly increasing in a line to create that triangle shape, which I believe is how the Camille Wrap cardigan is done. I don't have the pattern, so I can't say for sure. But looking at it, it does look like it's just one static increase rate to create that flat triangle shape. But I know from watching Rebecca's podcast that the Cara Wrap Top received quite a lot of attention when it came to the shaping of those front pieces, especially when it came to the testing phase and testers were trying it out. I know she created a really unique increase rate to make sure that every single size fit the body properly. And this created a really beautiful figure hugging fit to the Cara Wrap Top. Now, of course, there are a couple of differences. The Camille Wrap cardigan features some double knit edgings, both with the front tie as well as, I believe, on the cuffs of the sleeves, whereas Rebecca's just has an I-cord trim along, but you could very easily sub in a double knit or even just a thicker I-cord if you feel confident doing that. But I do feel that this one is a great option if you're looking for a really nicely fitted wrap top. The Camille Wrap features some big balloon sleeves that come in tight at the sleeves. That would be something that you could modify with the Cara Wrap cardigan, just omit the decreases for the sleeves. So a few key differences, but also some good similarities. Keeping with the wrap theme, this next one is a pattern that I have had in my favorites for a long time because I really love this and I wish this was size inclusive. This is the Camille Top by Joanna Garish. And the pattern that I have found that is a dupe for it is not an exact dupe, but I feel like it still gives the same vibe as the Camille Top. And that is the Desert Bloom top by Rachel Kurahara. I hope I pronounced correctly. I do apologize if I did not. This pattern has that same wrap front style and then a cute little peplum. The biggest difference is that this one has short sleeves compared to the sleeveless Camille top. But looking at the Camille top, it is just really thin straps when you get to the top and then the back. And for myself, I would need to have a wider strap anyway, so I don't mind that the dupe that I found in the Desert Bloom top has little cap sleeves instead. So those little sleeves are actually made with a top-down raglan, so you wouldn't be able to omit them, but I think they're a really cute detail to the Desert Bloom top that I think is definitely really, really cute, and I think I would get more wear out of it if it was done with a little cap sleeve. I really love that look, and I would get a lot of wear out of that in my wardrobe. And I think it is a pretty good dupe for the Camille top in order to evoke the same vibe. Now, the last Joanna Garish pattern that I'm going to talk about is actually two separate patterns that she sells separately. However, the dupe that I have is a pattern that involves both options in one pattern. So the Joanna Garish patterns are the jean sweater and jean cardigan. And the dupe that I have is the Tides sweater by Rebecca Clow of the Crayabea. Both options included in one pattern, a pullover and a cardigan. So there are some key differences between these patterns, but they do take advantage of the same stitch pattern, which is that fan and feather lace. Joanna Garish's pattern does include the eyelets in that lace, so the increases are done using yarn overs. However, Rebecca Clow has made this pattern without those yarn over increases, so you don't have that lacy style to the sweater. Joanna's pattern is a top-down raglan versus Rebecca's is a dropped shoulder. So they are slightly different, but I do feel that they evoke the same style with that same stitch pattern. And of course, you can play around with having multiple colors like both of Rebecca's samples, or going for a single color like the jean cardigan. You could very easily just sub in all one color for Rebecca's pattern. And I really love the cardigan version that she did. I think it just looks so cute with all those Easter egg colors of mohair, and it really gives it such a flowiness to it. That is the last key difference between these two patterns that I wanted to share, and that's that the Tide sweater is knit using a fluffy yarn, either I think it's mohair held double or a blown style yarn. Her navy and white sample was done using a single yarn, but her multicolor cardigan version was knit using some mohair that she had in her stash. So there is also some room to play with that. Versus Joanna's patterns, I believe, are knit using DK weight or a fingering plus a mohair. So slightly different options there for the yarn that is used in the pattern, but very easily to make some substitutions if you want to. Apologies if things look a little different. I had already recorded my video and then I found two patterns that are even better dupes than the ones that I had included in my video originally. So I'm re-recording those two sections because I think these patterns are better. They look closer to the original non-size inclusive option. So here we are recording again. I've done my best to make things look exactly the same, but it is a few days later. The next non-size inclusive pattern on my list is the Love Letter top by Katova Kika or Veronica Lindbergh. Now, Veronica is one of those designers that she's a little wishy-washy with her sizing. Sometimes her sizes actually do go over the minimum requirement to be size inclusive, but oftentimes they're just too far underneath. So she's not really a reliable designer for me to constantly look at her patterns, but I do keep an eye on them because sometimes they are size inclusive. However, the Love Letter top is not. I remember absolutely loving this pattern when it came out, and it was really popular on Ravelry for a while. I think it got the front page of Ravelry at one point, and I just remember a lot of people making it. But sadly, I cannot make it because it is not size inclusive and I barely fit into the range of the pattern. It wouldn't fit me properly, so that's disappointing, but I have found a really good dupe for this pattern, but you need to be a little open-minded because it might not look exactly like the Love Letter top because of the color choice. The size inclusive option that I have found for the love letter top is the Store Sand top by Sari Nordland. And looking at the two together here, they don't look the same, but they can. All you need to do is knit the Store Sand in a single color, especially white if you really want it to look like the love letter top, which to me, I love that white lace. I think it's so elegant. It's so beautiful. I actually saw this come up in my Instagram. I think I was just browsing and someone's version of this popped up all in one color, and it was white. And it looked the spitting image of the love letter top. But when I went to look at the pattern on Ravelry, of course it doesn't look like that because it is this striped sequence along with those lace sections. But that's an easy fix to do. All you need to do is knit it in a single color. The sample of the Store Sand top that Sari is wearing in her pattern photos makes it look like the straps come out a lot wider than the love letter top. However, I've seen people's projects on Ravelry and on Instagram that show it being more narrow. So I wonder if there's an ability to change that in the pattern, or if that's just dependent on what size you make. So it's not going to be identical with the shaping of the love letter top, but you're going to get those sections of lace going down the whole tank top, and if you knit it in a single color, it's going to look very similar. The next pattern on my list that is not size inclusive broke my heart to see that it wasn't, and that is White Run by Melody Hoffman. Melody is one of my favorite designers. I've knit her Into the Woods jumper, and it was my first colorwork pattern, and I absolutely loved it. And I have several more of her patterns in my queue and on my favorites. However, when she released White Run, it was only released in 4 sizes, and I was just gutted because I love this pattern so much, and I really wanted to be able to make it. And Melody has been size inclusive since about 2022, so it was really surprising to see that this wasn't size inclusive. And I did have a little chat with her. Apparently the lace chart was just too challenging for her to expand beyond those 4 sizes, 4 or 5 sizes. So that was really disappointing to see. Hopefully her future patterns will continue to be size inclusive, and maybe she'll return to White Run at some point, because I think it's so cool to see a worsted or bulky weight lace sweater. I think it's such a great style and juxtaposition of something that's typically used with lighter, airier yarns because it's lace, but you're using a bulky yarn to kind of like buff it up a bit. I really love that combo. So I have found a pattern that looks very similar to White Run. However, it's not the same gauge. It is a bit of a smaller gauge. It is using a DK sized yarn rather than a bulky, but it was too close not to be my pattern dupe for this. And this is one that I just learned about very recently. It is the Thalia sweater by Megan Houghton, otherwise known as Pearl by Ray. And I hope I pronounced that right. It might just be the Thalia sweater. I never know if you're supposed to pronounce an H or not in a name. But this one was introduced to me by Cozy Books and Knits, or Cozy Books and Yarn, Eleanor. She's one of my newer podcast finds, and she was doing a video of her dream knitting patterns, and an all over lace sweater was one of her dream knitting patterns, and she showed off the Thalia sweater. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, I have to re-record my video because that is such a good dupe for White Run. So this is one that is going to be slightly different, like I mentioned, because of the gauge difference, but I really feel that this evokes the same style as White Run. They're both drop shoulder, all over lace patterns with these really beautiful balloon sleeves. The difference with Thalia is that Thalia is knit bottom up, and the sleeves are also knit bottom up so that you keep that lace pattern going in the same direction. Now, I have taken a look at the project photos, and there are a couple of them where people have sleeves that are definitely too long. So what I would highly recommend for the Thalia sweater is knitting the body first and blocking the body so that you know how big your lace opens and how far down the body will go, because it is a drop shoulder, and then doing your sleeves and blocking your sleeves before you join them to the body to make sure that you are not making your sleeves too long. Can you tell that I don't like it when my sleeves are too long? I don't mind it if it's like a big open cuff and I can just pull it over my hand like this. I do, however, really mind it when it is a bishop sleeve because you have that really snug wrist and you have the big sleeve ballooning over, and if it's too long, it just covers the tight cuff at your wrist. And for me personally, as somebody knitting one of the larger sizes, I have a lot more fabric than someone knitting a smaller size, so it's a lot more obvious when your sleeves are too long. So that's my recommendation if you're going to make the Talia sweater. If you want it to look more like White Run, you might want to not do the picot bind off, but the picot bind off is actually my favorite part of the Talia sweater, and I would definitely include that if I was making it. And the Talia neckline is more shallow than the White Run. The White Run has this really wide double folded rib collar. The Talia has a much smaller one with that picot edge, but as far as I'm concerned, this has been the best dupe that I have found for the White Run, and I'm so glad that Eleanor introduced me to it because it immediately went into my favorites. Now I'm gonna have some fun pronouncing this next designer. I have a couple patterns that I wanted to share dupes for her patterns, and this is the Wave Sweater by Spectacalstrik. I hope I pronounced correctly. It is a Danish name. I do not speak Danish, so I have done my best. I apologize if I mispronounced that. But this sweater is one that is just really punchy, really vibrant. It's definitely really modern with that two-color graphic colorwork pattern. And I have included a pattern here that looks very similar to it. However, once I talk about that, I will also share another option coming soon. So the pattern that I have chosen that looks similar to the Wave Sweater is the Partner Pullover by Lydia Morrow. Now this one is slightly different. It has a smaller wave pattern. It's not that big graphic style. So it's not identical, but it does feature some of the same styles of the Wave Sweater, which is a nice tall turtleneck, a very punchy color palette. It does feature a wave design. So it's very fun, very like graphic and exciting. Now, the Partner Pullover is styled as a cropped sweater in this image, but you can very easily knit it longer and make it more of a big boxier pattern like the Wave Sweater. But if you're looking for something like the Wave that is just a little more into that graphic, almost like wallpaper style, and the Partner Pullover just isn't cutting it for you, you might want to keep an eye on Creative Anarchy Yarns' Instagram because she has a pattern coming soon that is going to be in testing very shortly that looks quite similar to the Wave Sweater, but is not identical. It's evoking the same style of those really bright, modern graphic sweaters. So if you like testing patterns, or if you're okay waiting a couple of months in order to get a pattern like the Wave Sweater, you should keep an eye on Creative Anarchy Yarns' Instagram and check out her new design. I have one more pattern by Spectacalstrik, and that is the Stripe Overload Polo. This is one that I have found something similar, not quite exact, but I think it's going to still evoke the same style. And that is the Classic Knit Polo by Chase Harpole. And the really exciting thing about Chase's pattern is that not only does it have a really wide range of sizes, it also features two different fit styles. So I think he calls them fit 1 and fit 2, or narrow shoulder and broad shoulder fits. He doesn't use masculine and feminine to differentiate the two, but they are essentially, if you fit in better with women's sizing, you would pick the narrow shoulder fit. If you fit in better with men's sizing, you would pick the broad shoulder fit. But this is, it's such a beautifully fitting pattern. I absolutely love the sample photos that Chase has modeled because you can tell it fits like a glove. This one has been shown as a long sleeve, but if you wanted a short sleeve, you could very easily just stop partway down your arm and do a little ribbed cuff there. The Stripe Overload Polo, as the name suggests, has a stripe pattern to it, which should be really easy to incorporate with Chase's pattern. The Stripe Overload looks like it's just increments of 2 rows for the striping. That's super easy to do whether you are knitting flat or in the round. It's really easy to keep that pattern going. If you have a pattern that doesn't have a stripe sequence included, you can really easily modify the non-stripe pattern to include that. The other key difference with these patterns is that Chase's pattern has 3 buttons down the front, and I think it would require a little bit more knitting knowledge and pattern experience in order to modify that to not have the buttons, because that's where a lot of the shaping takes place in the sweater. But if you have that skill set, you could modify Chase's pattern to not have the buttonholes so that it looks more similar to the stripe overload polo. But again, similar vibe, not quite exactly the same, but a pretty good dupe if I do say so myself. The next pattern on my list is one that is incredibly popular on Ravelry, and it's only in a single size, and it's not a very big size. That is the Leaf Top by Melanie Reinert, which I have found a dupe for in the Camellia Tank Top by Alongavec Anna. I have shared this pattern before, and when I shared it before, I did mention that it was a really good dupe for the Leaf Top. Now I'm officially saying it in a pattern roundup about size-inclusive dupes, so I'm getting to talk more about it as a dupe. But the Leaf Top is one that I've seen a lot of people make, including people that just found a way to modify it so that it could fit them better. So the Leaf Top is incredibly popular, and it's really disappointing that it only comes in a single size. But I really wanted to highlight the Camellia Tank Top as a good size inclusive option, because not only is it size inclusive in its measurements, there are a large amount of sizes that you can choose from in order to get a really good fit. You're not stuck with a one size fits only a few people. So both of these feature an all over lace pattern meant to look like leaves. However, they use a different pattern. So the Camellia top is more of a flower growing upwards, and the lace creates kind of like a shape around the knit stitches to make it look like it's a flower that's blooming, which I think is beautiful, versus the leaf top is meant to look like individual leaves on the tank top. But both of them feature a button front and straps. However, the Camellia top looks like they have slightly wider straps than the leaf top. I think the leaf top has I-cord straps, and the Camellia might have I-cord, or it might be just a small like double knit strap, but it would be very simple to make those straps a little wider if you needed. My pronunciation is going to be tested again. The next non-size inclusive pattern that I have is the Provence top by Ekaterina Vorobeva. I hope I pronounced correctly. I do apologize if I did not. And this is a pattern that I've had in my favorites on Ravelry for a long time, but it was never going to fit me. I'm outside the size range. So I've always had an eye out for a similar pattern, and just recently one was published, and that is Matilda by Jackie Badger. If you have not heard of Jackie Badger, you really should. Her patterns are so well fitted, and they place a lot of attention on correct bust fitting. So a lot of her patterns will have bust shaping. She even has a course called Knits to Fit Your Tits that helps you choose and modify patterns in order to fit your bust correctly. And the Matilda is a pattern that she shared last year because it was included in the Making Stories most recent issue. And as beautiful as the book is, there's all kinds of patterns in it. I was really only interested in Matilda, so I was really excited when, I think just last month or the month before, Jackie announced that she was going to be able to publish it individually, and I bought it as soon as I saw it. These patterns may look very similar, but there is a couple key differences between them. They're both bottom-up drop shoulder designs. However, the Sweetheart neckline of Jackie Badger's is done using short rows, whereas I believe looking at the photos of the Provence top, it's just changing where you're doing lace and where you're knitting stockinette. So it's all one piece, there's no changing. And the obvious difference with the Matilda is that it features 2 colors. But if you wanted the look of the Provence top, you could just use a single color. I have toyed with the idea of doing the Matilda in 2 colors, but the more options that I see in the projects on Ravelry, the more I'm convinced I want a 2-color version. I just think it's so complimentary having that lace be a different color, and it really makes the sweetheart stand out on the pattern. And it's just, I know it's going to be a beautiful fit because Jackie designed it. So this is one that's high in my queue of things I want to make. We're on to our second last pattern on this list, and that is the Owly blouse by Fauble Knitwear. Just a note on the name of this pattern, I do want to point out it is inspired by Harry Potter. It was released in 2019, so it is one that was kind of before J.K. Rowling's views were more widely known. And Helen has made a note on the pattern page that she does not agree with J.K. Rowling's views and she no longer finds inspiration in her work. However, if you want to avoid anything related to Harry Potter, and that is something that's really important to you, I just want you to also know that with this pattern so you can make an educated decision based on what your values are. But the pattern that I have chosen to be a dupe for this one is the Soufflé by Laura Penrose, which you'll know if you've been around here is one of my all-time favorite patterns. And it's not identical to the Owly blouse, but there are some beautiful details to it that give the same feel, and you could make a couple modifications in order to make it even more like the Owly blouse. So both of these feature a sheer neck made with mohair and then an opaque body to the sweater, and keeping with some nice open sleeves. Now both of these patterns have similarities, but there are also some key differences. The similarities is that they both feature a sheer neckline that is knit using mohair and then an opaque body. However, the Owly blouse continues the sheer mohair down the sleeves, whereas the Soufflé, once you've knit the ruffle, the rest of the body and sleeves becomes more opaque. I have shown an image of the short sleeve version, but I have knit a long sleeve version, which I'll show a photo of here as well, just so you can get an idea of how it looks similar to the Owly blouse. So you would need to do a couple key changes in order to make it look more like the Owly blouse, which features this really cute keyhole neckline. And a really easy thing that you could do with the Soufflé is just turn it around, because there's a keyhole back to that design. You could very easily change it so that's on the front. The pattern doesn't have short rows, so you could very easily do that and still have a similar fit to the pattern. And you would just need to change how you do your edging details. So the Soufflé has an I-cord edge around the neck as well as that keyhole, and then you create a little buttonhole using I-cord. If you wanted it to look more like the Owly blouse, I would just leave the slit part of the keyhole plain. I wouldn't add an edging to it. Or if you really wanted to, you could just do a little crochet slip stitch in order to keep it looking really neat. And then I would pick up along the neckline of the Soufflé and I would knit a little ruffle along there. And you know, you don't need to do the ruffle along the body if you're going to do a little ruffle on the neck. So you could minimize your amount of ruffles, or if you want, you could go all in on the ruffles. So a couple of key changes would need to be made. Same with the sleeves. They do have, on the Owly blouse, there are some little frills on them. When you do your sleeves on the Soufflé, if you wanted to mimic the look of the Owly blouse, when you go to do your cuff, you would just do a couple of rows of like maybe ribbing to keep it nice and tight, and then increase back out again and do a short little ruffled cuff. I have one more pattern to share with you today, and that is the Eloise top by Friday Knits. Friday Knits is a designer that I have been keeping an eye on because I absolutely love her designs. They're very feminine. She's got some Bridgerton inspired pieces, hence the Eloise top. And I'm really interested in her patterns. I did purchase her Daphne dress, which I would like to make, even though it's not quite size inclusive. It's just under the cusp. Same with the Eloise top. It's just under that requirement. But I have been keeping tabs on her designs, and I have noticed that with her more recent patterns, she is reaching that size inclusive threshold. So I'm really excited and really hopeful that she is growing as a designer and is now offering size inclusive patterns. So I am keeping a hopeful eye out to see what she comes up with in the future, to see if all of her designs are now going to be size inclusive. But sadly, the Eloise top just doesn't quite hit the mark. So I have found something that is similar in style. You can make a couple modifications to it and it'll look even more like the Eloise top, but at first glance it might not look quite the same. And that is the Olivia sweater by Vera Rose. And this is a beautiful pattern. I have it in my queue, and it's one that it still evokes the same vibe as the Eloise top. I could totally see Eloise Bridgerton wearing something like this, but it needs a couple of tweaks to make it look more like the Eloise top if that's what you're going for. So both of these patterns feature a sheer section along the yoke that features this really cute bobble stitch. I think it's a great detail. It's one that I haven't seen in many patterns, which is why I chose the Olivia sweater to be a dupe for the Eloise top, even though they don't look exactly the same. I was toying with some other options, but I did end up going with this one because it had that same stitch detail. And there are options that you can change with the Olivia sweater to make it look even more like the Eloise top. One thing that you could do is when you pick up your sleeves for the Olivia blouse, instead of holding your mohair and your fingering together, just pick up your sleeves with the mohair. You're then going to have those nice sheer sleeves, and you can stop them halfway down your arm instead of going all the way down to your forearm for that 3/4 length sleeve. And instead of bringing them in and cinching them together with that double knit cuff, just do an I-cord bind off and it'll look very similar to the sleeves of the Eloise top. Another difference between the two is that you're not going to get that sweetheart neckline with the Olivia sweater, but I still think you're going to get the same style. And instead of doing that ribbed neckline right at the top, you could do an I-cord edging to give it more of the look of the Eloise top. Like some of the other patterns that have been on this list, very similar vibes, might require a few tweaks to make it even more similar, but we got the vibes. And that wraps up this pattern roundup of my top 20 size-inclusive dupes. I have to be honest, I was a little nervous to make this video just because I really didn't want to put a spotlight on designers who are not being inclusive and invite a lot of negative discourse about that. I really wanted to frame this video as finding size-inclusive options that you could make instead if you need a larger size like I do, or if you prioritize only knitting size-inclusive patterns in solidarity with those of us who need larger sizes. So again, I want to emphasize that this video was not meant to be critical of designers who are not being size-inclusive. It was not meant to tear anyone down. It was meant to provide an option for those of us who need another option. Thank you so much for sticking it out to the end of this video. I hope you found something that you liked in this video, and if you know someone else who might be interested in the patterns on this list, I hope you share it their way. While you're here, it would help my channel if you could like this video, subscribe to my channel, and please leave me a comment below. Let me know which of these patterns that you really liked, or better yet, if there is a non-size inclusive pattern that you really like and wish there was a size inclusive option for, please leave it below. I'm going to do my best to hopefully make another one of these videos, but it really does depend on if I can find size inclusive options for those non-size inclusive patterns. But I would really like to try and do some more, so leave me your suggestions below and I'll see what I can do. Just a reminder, in my description box below, I do also have 2 affiliate links, one to Création Miss Couture Yarns based in Alberta, and one to Hastakatha's Etsy shop, where if you use my code Whitney10, that gets you 10% off your purchase. Thank you all so much for joining me, and I hope you all take care and happy knitting!